Hello, my name is Ayushi Jain. I'm a doctoral student at Sitara IIT Bombay. Prior joining IIT for PhD, I completed BTech from Amity University, Lucknow, and MTech from Motilal Nehru National Institute of Technology, Allahabad, in the area of biotechnology. So I joined Sitara with an intention to work in the area of bioprocessing or biofuels, but the 4-week field stay in a tribal district in Madhya Pradesh, just immediately after the completion of my coursework, where I had the first exposure to the issue of rampant child malnutrition in India, made me completely change my mind, and I was driven to study this issue as part of my doctoral work. Up until then, my understanding about malnutrition as a development issue was as managed as it could be. So this 4-week field stay is a mandatory requirement for all PhD students that they need to undergo in their PhD tenure, especially in the initial years to have a first-hand exposure to the developmental challenges in India. I was accompanied by my senior colleague who was pursuing malnutrition as core human development issue in her doctoral work. We went to Shiopur MP, which was a newly formed district then, carved out of Morena, the Chambal belt in Madhya Pradesh. So Shiopur is largely inhabited by tribes called Saharia. This was my first ever exposure to tribal setting in India, or Bharat, as my professor would happily refer to. During our stay, we surveyed 8 villages, both tribal and non-tribal. We were guided by the team at Nandi Foundation, which was working there to improve the nutrition and education status of the vulnerable communities. I learned about ICDS, its functioning, interacted with a number of field-level functionaries, took anthropometric measurements of children, learned tools to distinguish between different forms of malnutrition. We also interacted and collected data from government functionaries from various line departments, such as health, education, agriculture, in order to triangulate data. And I first time understood what working in silos actually meant. So this field stay retrospectively provided me one's eye view of the challenges persisting at ground level, gave me a perspective that malnutrition is just not an issue of poor nutrition. It's more of a multi-sectoral and multi-dimensional issue where many stakeholders have a role to play. And I can proudly say that my learning actually began right on the field, and there was no looking back from there onwards. So, after initial trials and tribulations exploring the core theme of my research, I began my doctoral work under Professor Satish Agnihotri, who had joined as a full-time professor in Satara after his career-long stint in Indian Administrative Services. His rich experiences as an administrator, his anecdotes from the field, drive towards using data for better evidence generation, all of these motivated me further to pursue this domain. Luckily, it was also the time when nutrition was taking the center stage in the development agenda. We also had good quality representative data for all 640 districts for the first time from the 4th round of National Family Health Survey. So, the urge to use this data as a robust input for evidence generation, I focused my doctoral work at Sitara, looking at the broad issue of child malnutrition in India from 3 perspectives. At the macro level, understanding the role composite index play as a tool for estimating the burden, for identifying the poor and better performing regions, and also learning from extensive literature review that there is no specific composite index in place for estimating triple burden of malnutrition. So the first objective we dealt was to develop such an index using the right tools and methods that informs about both balanced and unbalanced development across dimensions, and goes with the idea of equity in development. We found that the new alpha measure Manush, which was developed by Mishra and Nathan, is very sensitive and in bringing out these nuances well when compared to widely used linear averaging or geometric mean method, the one that is used in HDI. The Manush measure inherently puts premium on development or attainment in lagging indicator and penalizes when the development across dimension is not balanced. So we adopted this measure for computing triple burden of malnutrition across districts and states in India using NFHS4 and CNNS datasets. The geospatial analysis using Manush scores not only revealed heterogeneities in burden across districts and states, but they also revealed formation of significant clusters of low burden and high burden districts which were more prominent at NSS region level. So the NSS regions are natural regions that are defined by common agroclimatic zones. The findings have been published in International Journal for Equity in Health. So this study further fueled my curiosity to understand the drivers responsible for such clustering and disparities in malnutrition in India. Using advanced statistical tools such as principal component analysis and hierarchical clustering on NFHS4 unit level data, we derived significant predictors explaining the variation in child anthropometric outcomes at national, state, and NSS level. The findings also revealed that these predictors varied when one moves from aggregated to disaggregated levels of geography. More so, the hierarchical clusters of states and NSS regions revealed that clusters with better child anthropometric outcomes and clusters with poor child anthropometric outcomes, both of them have a different set of covariates explaining variation in the outcomes in these clusters. So the findings add to the growing body of evidence that informs the policymakers to chuck the one size fit all approach and focus on developing region-specific plan of action to address the issue of malnutrition in India. The third and important component of my doctoral work involved understanding the malnutrition at micro level. So for this, I undertook knowledge, attitude, and practice study around key nutrition themes to study the gaps in supply and demand side among the service providers and community members, respectively. So the study was undertaken as part of my internship at Coalition for Food and Nutrition Security in Delhi. It was conducted in 5 parts in 5 districts of Rajasthan, and it was funded by Tini Tata Trust. It was a multi-stakeholder study consisting of 3,000 plus sample, which captured the perspectives of all important stakeholders, both in community and in the government, in ICDS. So the study was conducted using mixed method research. One of the key takeaways from this study was that despite the good knowledge persisting around key nutrition themes such as exclusive breastfeeding, knowledge in complementary feeding, knowledge and prevention of anemia, the internalization of this knowledge and conversion into the practice, it still remains a challenge due to various social and cultural barriers. The findings also highlighted how men's involvement in driving social and behavior communication change is crucial and it remains untapped largely. More so on the supply side, the study revealed poor capacities of the field functionaries for routine growth measurements and how they fail to distinguish between different forms of malnourishment in children. So these were the 3 broad areas of my doctoral work. Moving ahead, talking about the opportunities I had at Sitara. So I had the privilege of presenting my work at various national and international conferences, of which presenting at International Health Conference at University of Oxford will be the most memorable experience so far. And I'm extremely proud to be mentored by that very passionate team of mentors such as Professor Satish Agnihotri, Professor Narendra Shah, Professor Amit Arora, Dr. Rupal Dalal, Professor Jitendra Shah, and many more to the list. Uh, I'm also happy to be supported by a strong peer group that constitute the nutrition team at Sitara, comprising of not only my fellow PhD colleagues, but also master students, research associates, project interns, and also a rich, ever-growing base of alumni now. So being part of the nutrition group has helped me to widen my perspective on various different topics on nutrition, and has introduced me to a whole lot of new learning opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I see the application of most of these skills and perspectives that I've acquired as a part of Nutrition Group and Sitara at IIT Bombay, day in and day out in carrying out my current role at United Nations World Food Programme, where I'm currently positioned as Senior Program Associate, M&E and Research for more than a year. I wish Nutrition Group Sitara the very best, and may it keep growing and contributing in the field of research, and also simultaneously creating a rich pool of development professionals in the field of nutrition. Thank you, and all the very best.
Hello, I'm Suveena, an alumni of Sitara Department, Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas, IIT Bombay. Primarily, I am an information science engineer who turned into technology and development professional post my master's program from IIT Bombay. I am currently working in SBI Foundation, the corporate social responsibility arm of State Bank of India. Often looking at my journey, career trajectory, people question me on the leaps and jumps that I have taken across varied topics, most often terming it as unrelated. But let me assure you one thing. It is not the same scenario once the person evolves in Sitara department. My association with Nutrition Group IIT Bombay began through my thesis. Since the beginning, I was more inclined towards tribal development department and its functioning. And during that time, I interviewed for UNICEF fellowship. UNICEF was at that time working on malnutrition with Sitara students on various fronts, the data science work, the product development, etc., etc. And my interest to work in tribal development transformed into malnutrition in tribal India. There are two opposite versions to malnutrition in tribal India: the Schedule 5 states and the Schedule 6 states. The Schedule 5 states that are spread across the central India contradict in malnutrition behavior and trends with that of Schedule 5 states, which are in northeastern part. Dietally speaking, the central belt do not have a protein-dense diet as compared to the northeastern states. Apart from this, there are various other socio-economic parameters that weighs heavily on the central belt state. In continuation of the same, I was drawn towards understanding the One Full Meal program, which is the flagship program for reduction of maternal malnutrition in states like Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, etc. In Maharashtra, it is famously called as Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Amrutahar Yojana. The success of One Full Meal program in southern states is due to effective and channelized implementation through SHG model by Women and Child Welfare Department. However, what we found out during the research is that the replication of schemes needs certain degree of customization for effective delivery of the outcomes, such as tweaking more of budget flow, operation of the whole mechanism, channeling of the target population, the counseling method, the social behavioral change communication strategies, and proper monitoring framework, which is the crux of the whole framework. There are some insights that gave me the opportunity to present our work in Oxford Annual Health Conference in Oxford University, 13th FENS International European Nutritional Conference in Dublin, IFPRI India, just to name a few. During the second part of master thesis, it navigated into convergence theory. As Amrutahar Yojana is project under Tribal Development Department of Maharashtra government, which is being implemented in the Anganwadi centers that fall under the Women and Child Welfare Department. This particular part is highly sought after as there are many agencies, different departments and non-profit organizations working on the same subject and in the same target on the same target population. However, there has to be a convergence theory which is best suited for both the organization so that the targets or the deliverables are provided. Convergence theory, in my perspective, plays a highly efficient catalytic role. The 3 years in Sitara and 2 years with UNICEF were pivotal in my quest to understand and decode the maternal and child malnutrition in tribal India and the convergence theory, which has been a forefront tool for me during my professional work post UNICEF fellowship. It's almost a fairy tale story to realize that I actually used the same convergence theory to facilitate 3 master students group from IIT Bombay, Sitara department for their TD 609 field stay in our project locations of SBI Gram Seva. And like the saying goes in IIT Bombay, alumni is not just alma mater but amma mater. The teachings of Dr. Rupal Dalal on breastfeeding techniques, Professor Agnihotri on data-driven governance, and the many research findings by IIT Bombay Nutrition Group, especially the decision-making charts and data mapping, data visualization across the states and districts, have actually helped me navigate the projects towards impactful and efficient deliverables and pave the way for development. These learnings have always been the helicopter shot of Mahendra Singh Dhoni for me. एक बॉल से 6 रन जेब में. And India, in its fight against malnutrition, needs such strategic helicopter shots. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Krittika R. Patel. I have done my bachelor's in Electrical and Electronics Engineering. I have completed my MTech from Sitara in the year 2021, where my thesis focused on public health and nutrition. In the second year of my MTech, I was awarded UNICEF Sitara Fellowship. During this period, I worked on the public health and nutrition data, which comprised of the ICDS data for Maharashtra and the HMIS data for Maharashtra and Bihar. After my MTech, I have been working as a research fellow in Ministry of Women and Child Development, New Delhi, where my focus is on the data analysis of Poshan Tracker and convergence of health and nutrition. I have also published a policy brief related to usage of albendazole in maternal health system. It is available on IITB Nutrition Group, and its abstract was also accepted for Global Health Forum 2022. I have been associated with a nutrition group since starting of my second year of my MTech. I'm really delighted to be a part of this group because the discussions that happen in the meetings are really good, are really amazing, and they give you a very broad perspective for understanding various issues that are prevailing for public health and nutrition, and they become a platform to build upon your research. Thank you.
Hello everybody. Today in our analysis of journey of various states from NFHS 4 to NFHS 5 round of survey, we are going to Kerala and see what children have done or how has the state fared in terms of its children's nutrition status in God's own country. Kerala has a good track record in terms of nutrition status of its children, but as one would expect, its further journey will resemble an uphill climb. So one has to be appreciative of that fact. Kerala has also done well in terms of reduction in child mortality, but there are some regional variations, interesting regional variations in Kerala in its performance. And very typically, the southern region and the northern region tend to differ. And maybe in some sense, the southern tip and the northern tip differs in its performance. So it is important, therefore, that we map this journey to stress the need for a more nuanced and decentralized planning, which Kerala already usually does. In this analysis that we present, we have used the website nfhs4.indiagis.org, that is for NFHS4 data and maps, and nfhs5.indiagis.org, which is for the 5th round. And then we have used QGIS to further modify the maps as the need was. And any one of the viewers can do it themselves. It's not rocket science. How is the story unfolded for underprivileged? Now here, little worrying fact that we are seeing slippages. Now one would have expected Kerala to continue to better, but as I said, now we are looking at the uphill climb portion of it. So we see slippages across the state, and that's important. But the data range in terms of percentage of children who are underweight in a district, that remains nearly the same. One would rather say it has gone marginally up. While doing this analysis, we have used the same cutoffs for NFHS4 and NFHS5. So we want to see what has happened, gains and losses in NFHS5. So this story of what has happened to stunting? Let's take it. In stunting, we see a more worrying across the state, except the southern tip. Now, when I say more worrying slippage, Kerala, compared to other states, might have done that, might have continued to. But Kerala is comparing itself at the NFHS4 round with itself in NFHS5 round. And therefore, the bar has been set higher for the state. And that's something which the state should accept. So we see a slightly worrying slippage in case of stunting. Barring one district in the NFHS5 round, if we use the same cutoffs as NFHS4, the whole state goes into the reddish band, that is about 22% children being stunted, which is not a good development. Let's look at the other aspect, wasting. In wasting, the story gives you some kind of a mixed bag. So there have been some reductions, particularly in the northern tip. We will see some reduction, 2 districts moving from the red band into the yellow band. But new districts showing a worsening picture. The southern tip hasn't done well, and that should be a matter of concern because the southern tip is usually doing well in most of the countries. So this is something which Kerala needs to look at, and probably look at the urban and rural nuances also, but that's a separate issue. What happens to CVL? This is one area where there are considerable gains across the state. And this comes out very clearly from the map. Overall, if you look at the data range, there's a percentage of children who are severely wasted. It reduces significantly, both on the lower bound and on the upper bound. In NFHS4, the lower bound was 3.2%, the upper bound was 14.3%. In NFHS5, the lower bound has gone down to 2.11%, and upper bound has come down from 14.3 to 8.6. That's significant, and that also reflected in the red bands disappearing completely and greenish patch appearing. So wasting is something where Kerala has done fairly well. This would have an implication, and we'll talk about it towards the end. What has happened to child mortality? As per NFHS4 and 5, we are not comparing it with the SRS annual reports, but we are looking at NFHS4 and 5. We will see an impressive performance in the urban segment in reducing infant mortality and under 5 mortality rate. The neonatal mortality in urban is low compared to the rural. Infant mortality again is considerably low. it is the rural segment in Kerala which is requiring to catch up. Now, when we talk about Kerala, we usually say that there's hardly any difference between the rural and urban. It's a continuum, but that may not necessarily be the case when it comes to the medical infrastructure for children and mothers. So that rural part needs a little more careful scrutiny, and probably some stepping up of program intervention has to be done. Interesting story comes in anemia. If you recall our previous analysis of other states and all India level, in anemia levels in NFHS 5 have jumped across the country. And interestingly, it's the lower bound which has jumped hugely, the upper bound also, but in case of Kerala, we see a mixed picture when it comes to children in the 6 to 59-month age group. It's a mixed picture, but the state has still bucked the national trend. So the lower range has gone up from 18.1 to something like 30.3, which again looks a little implausible. We see this here clearly that the southern tip, or the southern half, I would say, which has done fairly well, there also we see some deterioration. In the middle part, there's a high incidence of anemia by Kerala standards. So therefore, I think we need to look at this, but this trend of anemia not getting aggravated very significantly, that is seen again in the 15 to 19 age group for women. Now this is important because there are considerable gains, and again the state has bucked the trend. The range of percentage anemic women, it has narrowed down, though marginally. But this is national trend is everything has gone up. In Kerala, if you look at the data range, percentage anemic women, 15 to 19 age group, of course we are talking about, from 21%, it has actually come down to 20.9. So 21.4 to 20.9 means it has not gone up. The upper bound from 47.9, or we can say 48%, has come down to 43.3. Now that is significant. So when we look at this whole issue of NFHS 5, anemia measurement, methodology issue, or any other confounding parameter, Kerala will probably be an interesting benchmark. The same story repeats when it comes to women in 15 to 49 year age group. There are considerable gains across the state, but the data range in terms of percentage anemic women has actually marginally, but only marginally, from 22.4 lower bound, it has jumped to 27. The 42.9 or 43% women being anemic, the upper bound has jumped to 49.6, or you can say 50. But if you look at NFHS cutoff levels and look at what has happened at the NFHS 5, the southern half has lost out. But there have been gains on the northern and, or one would say in the middle Kerala. What does it tell us overall? Tell us that Kerala has faced some hiccups in improving the nutritional status of its children. Second is severe wasting has reduced significantly, however. So that is one good news one can say. Urban child mortality levels have reduced considerably, and rural needs to catch up. That's the other action point. Anemia, the state has bucked the national trend, but probably it would need to do something more. We could probably wait for one more round of NFHS to see how the anemia story unfolds. One interesting point is Kerala can afford to talk in terms of having a Poshan district. One is not talking of a block or a project, one entire district. At least a district which is underweight free, or a district which is wasting free. Now a similar feat was actually achieved by Kerala in the total literacy campaign days, where one district and the second district and the third district in Kerala, they declared themselves 100% literate. And it had fired the imagination of the rest of the country. Can Kerala do it again? We leave the viewers with this thought before we move to another state. Thank you very much.